Now a forum with lesser-known presidential candidates who filed to run in New Hampshire. To file for the state's presidential primary, candidates need to submit a form and pay a $1,000 fee. Over 40 candidates have done so.
I'm the president and CEO of the New Hampshire Political Library, and it's my honor to introduce one of the founders of the New Hampshire Political Library. To my right, Secretary of State Bill Gardner.
This event has evolved as part of the New Hampshire presidential primary tradition, a tradition that keeps alive the opportunity for any American to someday be able to become president. Just before the 1972 primaries, several lesser-known candidates were given the chance to be part of a formal debate, and that opportunity has been continued since then. The people of New Hampshire have wanted their primary to be open to all candidates who wish to share their thoughts and their ideas with us. And this debate is an opportunity to do just that.
Thank you for being here with us this evening. And I would like to introduce the members of the New Hampshire Political Library Board who serve as panelists this evening. First is Sean O'Kane, to my immediate left, of Hollis, New Hampshire. He has served on the Political Library's Board of Directors since it was founded. His past positions include serving as Center of New Hampshire General Manager and Commissioner for New Hampshire's Department of Resources and Economic Development. He has worked with both Democratic and Republican gubernatorial administrations in New Hampshire. To his left, Marie McKay of Chichester, New Hampshire, and as the managing principal of Bigelow and Company. Marie has been with the firm for almost 25 years. In addition to serving on the board of the Political Library, is the treasurer for Kids Voting New Hampshire, and also a board member of the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. She also serves on the Budget Committee of the Town of Chichester and on the board of the Red Cross of Greater Manchester. Ambassador Terry Shoemaker of Concord is the former ambassador and member of the Democratic National Committee and is vice chair of the Political Library's Board of Directors. He served also as executive director of NEA New Hampshire. I want to go over just a couple of details before we get started this evening. This forum is being carried live by Community Access Television and will air nationally on C-SPAN. Because of this, we appreciate your cooperation with the following ground rules to ensure that all candidates are given equal opportunity to participate, as well as a quality program. As hosts for this event, the New Hampshire Political Library asks candidates, observers, and audience members to please respect each other's comments and space by not applauding or making commentary other than the formal debate process. This evening will be divided into two segments. The first group represents those who have filed in the Democratic New Hampshire primary. The second group, which is seated immediately to the side here, represents those who have filed to run in the New Hampshire Republican primary. We have asked that all candidates participate in the entire forum by staying with us on stage throughout the duration. After the first group has gone through its set of questions, we will change the podiums up and we'll ask you to join us at our side. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for opening remarks, and we will start with the letter C and move down the line. After that, our panel of questioners will be rotating and asking questions on a variety of topics. We are starting with the idea that your questions will be limited to 30 seconds. However, the moderator has the prerogative to work with that time period depending on the detail of the question being asked. There will be no closing statements after the questioning is completed. So, on to the candidates themselves. Rich Caliguri, welcome to New Hampshire.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank my mother and father for life and the time to explore it on my own terms. I'm able to stand here today because of them. From my father, I learned honesty. From my mother, I learned hard work. I'm pretty good with the honesty, but that hard work still gives me some shakes. I have the greatest respect for people who are honest, hardworking, intelligent, and creative. These qualities translate into integrity, responsibility, and productivity. They are the people that make this country great. I would also like to thank the people of New Hampshire for providing an opportunity for anyone in this country to be a candidate for the highest political office. This is the model for the rest of the country. Democratic and Republican politicians across the country have made it extremely difficult for the average citizen to challenge them at the ballot box. I believe that this country is a society today, not a civilization. I have always considered myself fiscally conservative and socially liberal. As a result, I feel that the two most destructive policies created by people in government are deficit spending at any government level and the illegality of recreational pharmaceuticals. From the beginning, to me, that has always been an individual choice, but over the last 30 years, I have come to believe that these laws create the violence on our streets and clog our courts and prisons, wasting taxpayer resources and time. The three major suggestions that I have to offer are what I consider individual rights, a citizen's democracy where the citizens vote on issues and budgets and projects, and then something I call metropolis/urban redevelopment. What we have now is a government of the special interest by the politicians for everybody else. Through the technology of computers, I believe that the citizens could create a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Do I have any time left?
5 seconds.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Excuse me, Mr. Cheney, excuse me, did you say we should not applaud?
We would ask that that you not react to another panelist's comment. Henry Hewes.
My name's Henry Hewes, and I'd like to say a little about why I chose to participate in this. I think the election process is about more than just votes. It's also about, as a country, coming to agreements as to how we're going to proceed to handle the problems that we have. And it's absolutely essential that political candidates and citizens and newspaper reporters and historians engage in a conversation about the critical issues that affect all of our citizens. For me, I think that ties together all of the issues I talk about in my campaign. I'm strongly pro-life. I'm opposed to the death penalty. I'm in favor of a $10 an hour minimum wage. I'm also in favor of keeping the taxes on capital gains and dividends at 15%. I'm opposed to the war in Iraq. In fact, I'm opposed to occupying anybody else's country anywhere. So going beyond pulling troops out of Iraq, I'd pull them out of Europe. I think that all of the candidates here have ideas that need to be heard, and I encourage all the people of New Hampshire not to lose faith in this process, because every single person has an opportunity to participate in a meaningful and valuable way. And we all do what we can. Some people feel comfortable coming up here and giving speeches. Some people make a campaign contribution or stuff envelopes. Other people just engage in a political conversation, or probably at the lowest level, there are people who just listen. But all of that is part of the best political process in any country on the face of the earth. And so this is a celebration of that process and an affirmation of its primacy in American life.
Thank you.
How's that for timing?
Carolyn Killeen.
Good evening, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. New Hampshire, a state with so many firsts. Here's another first. Choose on January the 8th, Elvis Presley's birthday, a fringe candidate for president. either Democrat or Republican. To all the presidential candidates are advised by perennial candidate Caroline P. Killeen to declare their vice presidential choice. Need I elaborate? Killeen, who at 81 qualifies as a member of the greatest generation, is choosing, as vice presidential candidate, Dennis J. Kucinich, running mates. Strength to peace, that's his slogan. Resonates with war-weary Americans better than Rudy's, quote, wet our pants, unquote, scared rhetoric. In Killeen's administration, every presidential candidate, Democrat and Republican, major and minor, will have a job, position, where best suited. Climate change is more than real. It is catastrophic. Don't panic. That's the first step. Killeen then wants all Americans to install a solar dryer where brother sun shines on a white sheet that is printed for all to see. Mea culpa. Forgive, Father God, my complicity to CO2 emissions. This catharsis is imperative for the USA. First in CO2 gases. Avoid electronic gadgets, appliances. Challenge yourself, especially electric clothes dryers. Dry all garments on your solar dryer in the cellar, garage, etc. Restoring yours and mine nature walk. Leaving our space station home. Getting brother sun as he dries your clothes. Greeting brother sun as he dries your clothes. Now,
Carolyn?
while you're burning calories, there's only one, burning calories instead of fossil fuels. Oh, can I also challenge New Hampshire citizens to curb their spaceship, that's the car, 2 times a week. Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolyn. Michael Skoke.
I have decided to run for president for a very important reason. We are coming to a crisis in which only God Almighty can help us. It is our own very survival. We are under attack by 3 different enemies. Atheistic evolutionists, or the social progressives who are trying to destroy our Christian heritage and our Christian values. Islam terrorists who are trying to bring us, as well as the entire world, under Sharia law. Communist Red China, which has always considered itself the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, wants to destroy us economically, financially, and militarily to control the world. If we continue our mad pursuit of cheap labor and goods, it is my opinion that the next president will be our last president, and that this country will not have much more than 4 years. Here is what I propose to do. A constitutional convention, to call a constitutional convention together for the purpose of establishing Judeo-Christian religion as the religion of the United States. With the way our Constitution is being twisted around, we are fast becoming a godless nation with no moral absolutes. Our country was founded on religious principles by religious men. We separated from the British throne, declaring ourselves to be under the authority of God rather than the rule of the King of England. Now, however, prayer, Bible reading, and the mention of God is banned from most of our public institutions in the name of the human rights that God gave us. One result is that we are witnessing many horrible crimes being committed by our young people And I would invite you to read my website, michaelscope.com. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move into the questioning portion of the program. And we will start with the first question being answered by Mr. Caliguri and then move down the line for the first crack with ensuing questions. Sean O'Kane.
Thank you. And all the candidates, welcome to New Hampshire. A couple of you have touched on us a little bit. I'd like it open to the rest of the candidates to answer. What is your view of where this country is currently headed?
I feel it's bad. It's changed. You know, from when I grew up in the 50s and the 60s to it's bad, and I believe it originates from our politicians and the laws that they have created. That's why I said that this country is more of a society than a civilization, and it's like the fish stinks from the head. And
Thank you. Henry Hewes.
You know,
that's it.
that was quick, yeah.
Yeah, good answer.
That was because of that little joke I made about being able to manage the time. You know, I have a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for the United States. There are things wrong. There are things that scare me. I'm very concerned about what I think is a financial crisis coming over the next year or so. But at its heart, America is the best country in the world, and Ronald Reagan once said that we are the shining city upon the hill, the last best hope of mankind. And I'm afraid that I'm stuck on that.
Thank you. Carolyn?
The question again?
Where do you feel this country is headed, its current direction? Are you happy with the direction?
No. That's why I've come all the way from Italy over here to address climate change, unless that's the overriding issue in this campaign for president. It's all downhill for us because the other issues, health care and etc., won't have any relevance because this climate change or global warming, or as I like to call it, global terroricide and global genocide, it has to be addressed at this presidential level. And so the country is going down the drain because the major candidates are not giving it the priority it deserves.
Thank you, Carolyn. Michael Scope?
Well, I pray for our country every day, and I'm afraid it's as I said before, that we are heading into disaster unless we turn to God.
Thank you. The next question is from Marie McKay.
Thank you for coming. Mr. Hewes, we thank you for filing to run in the New Hampshire presidential primary.
I appreciate the opportunity to do so.
What is your reaction to campaigning and meeting voters in New Hampshire?
Well, you know, I think that New Hampshire is in many ways unique, and I was talking to some of the reporters before this about how bad it is that in this particular campaign, most of the front-runner candidates are hardly publicly campaigning anymore. They're going to scripted events where they control the audience and they control the conditions. And so there's much less of that retail person-to-person campaigning. I love it. I'm energized by it. But I think that the states like New Hampshire really have to figure out how to make the candidates get back to really talking to the people and not just standing there trying to spin their own public relations.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I didn't quite understand the
What
question.
is your reaction to campaigning and meeting with voters in New Hampshire?
My reaction to me?
Are you meeting with the voters in New Hampshire and campaigning in New Hampshire?
I still don't understand it.
Carolyn, what is it like campaigning in front of New Hampshire voters on the street? What's your reaction to those voters here?
That I've met out on the street?
Yeah.
Well, the New Hampshire voters get an A+ because the majority of them are well informed on political issues and the state of the nation. They're really out front in that area. And so I do meet some people who are not aware that people can give $1,000 filing fee. There are New Hampshire residents who are not aware of this $1,000 filing fee being able to put them on the ballot for president and be viable, at least in the one state. So, yeah, so it's very positive. The people of New Hampshire, I don't have to really preach to them too much. I learn from them, really.
Thank you. Mr. Skoke.
Well, I just got here last night, so I didn't talk to too many people. And I'm going to be staying until Saturday morning, and perhaps I could get a feeling of what they feel like. I believe that they're much like 75% of the people, that we are on the wrong track and that we need to get some right answers.
Thank you. Mr. Caligari?
Outside of the hotel staff at the Comfort Inn up in Concord, I haven't met any other New Hampshire voters, but I've been following New Hampshire for many years. Obviously, if I'm here, to know of the process. But what I really liked was I think it was 1992, when the voters of Dixville Notch voted for Andre Moreau of the Libertarian Party and beat the Republicans and Democrats. To me, that indicates that New Hampshire voters are very informed and concerned about their process and the political process, and they realize the importance of it. And, you know, being the first, given that week, helps to shape the race going into it. Personally, I'm hoping Republican Ron Paul comes in third in the Republicans, if that's the way. I don't know, Democrats and Republicans can vote for either candidate? Or Democrats will vote for Democrats, Republicans. I'm hoping Ron Paul comes in third in this state, and that'll jumpstart his campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Caligari. The next question will come from Ambassador Terry Shoemaker for Carolyn Colleen.
First of all, I'd like to thank the candidates for coming out and braving a traditional New Hampshire snowstorm. Very fitting that we would have that for you today, and thank you very much for being with us. I would ask you to think in your minds, each of you, as to we've had 44 presidents now, but I'd like you each to tell us which of the former presidents who are no longer living would you most like to emulate, and why? And who's first, Mike?
Carolyn Colleen is first.
John F. Kennedy. I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for or the late President John F. Kennedy. He founded a physical fitness program, the 50-mile hike. Well, in lieu of the 50-mile hike, I jumped on a bicycle from Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, went all the way to Clearwater, Florida, because I had a job waiting for me there, and that established my avocation as a campaigner on a bicycle for 30 years, from 1964 to 1996. I was here on the ballot as a hemp lady, and we must not be afraid of hemp. So John F. Kennedy inspired many of us.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you. Mr. Skoke.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I have any favorite presidents. Perhaps George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. That's it.
Thanks very much. Mr. Caligari?
I think Mr. Gardner can answer this question for me.
But he won't.
Thomas Jefferson.
And why?
I believe he was a political genius, an architectural genius, a Renaissance man. To me, he shaped this country and brilliantly. Yeah, that's the guy there.
Thank you.
Mr. Hewes?
Yeah, I wouldn't emulate anybody. I think that emulating any of our past presidents is a disaster. We have a new world today with new problems and new solutions and new ways we have to look at it. And if we're going to succeed and we're going to make America an even greater country, we need to look forward and think about new ways of dealing with immigrants, new ways of dealing with poor people, new ways of dealing with foreign adventurers. And so I try to stay away from emulating other people and saying, what is it we should do now?
Our next question is directed at Mr. Skoke by Sean O'Kane.
Thank you. A 2005 census report shows that nearly 36 million citizens fall within the ranks of poverty in our country, while 16 million fall within the ranks of deep poverty. What would your administration do to address this issue?
I believe that the principal problem is that we are exporting our jobs overseas, and we have destroyed the American dream, where you can have climb up the ladder, and we need to eliminate some of our free trade agreements and have fair trade instead of...
Thank you. Mr. Caligari?
I've watched from 1970, when there were 200 million people in this country, to last year when there was 300 million. The jobs have continued to grow. They haven't been great jobs, but to me that's amazing that within 37 years, 100 million people have come, and we've still been able to employ them, or they've been able to employ themselves. That's amazing. A lot of these jobs, we've gone from the industry, like in Pittsburgh, with the steel industry, to a lot of service jobs that paid lower, less benefits.
Mr. Hewes?
Yeah, I'm intensely troubled at the inequity that we have in this country. We have enough jobs, we have enough money, but we have to find a way to make sure that everyone in this country earns a living wage. The primary strategy that I would use would be to bring the minimum wage to $10 an hour. Yes, it's going to cost something, but America can afford to be in a situation where every guy who goes out and works for 8 hours, 5 days a week, makes enough money to provide for his family a decent life. And I think that one tactic, which could be done relatively simply, would change more people's economic lives in America than anything else we can talk about.
Carolyn?
I want to hear the question again. Be sure I got it right.
A census report shows that there are 36 million American citizens living at the poverty level and nearly 16 million in deep poverty. What would you do to address that issue?
Well, since I'm here standing in for Francis of Assisi, why we need to get back to a nature orientation. When I was growing up, we had a lot of labor-intensive jobs and lifestyle. And we've got to even it up again. Nature and technology, not everything in the technology sector. Get back to nature industries like clotheslines, etc.
Our next question comes from Marie McKay.
Thank you. The federal tax code is complex and for many taxpayers very difficult to understand. Some believe, though, that it includes some elements to stimulate the economy. What is your view of the federal tax code?
I don't like the federal tax code. The Pennsylvania income tax, I think, is 3.2%, which is reasonable. But the federal tax, we either go to I believe we should either go to a sales tax or a flat tax determined by the citizens of 3%, 5%, 7% to cover defense. Raising revenues, we're talking about jobs. I like projects like the Big Dig, the third water tunnel in New York, the sewage tunnel in Chicago.
Mr. Hewes.
I really think that the federal income tax is a disaster. It's a disaster for the economy in general, for the people who have to pay it, and in a sense, my predecessor has stolen a little of my thunder here, because I'm a strong supporter of a value-added tax, which would have to be in the range of 27 to 25%, and would have to include adjustments to make sure that it did not fall disproportionately on poorer people. But I think that changing the income tax so we are not taxing labor, if you tax something, you discourage it. So I would be in favor of going quickly to a value-added tax to replace the revenue lost by the income tax.
Carolyn Colleen.
Well, as you know, I don't have anybody, how do you say, political advisors, but what I could say is Mike Huckabee is advocating a sales tax, 23%, eliminate the federal income tax. I pretty much go along with that.
Thank you. Mr. Skoke?
I agree that we should eliminate the federal income tax amendment and use sales taxes.
Thank you. The next question will be directed to Henry Hewes by Ambassador Terry Shoemaker.
Mr. Hewes, we're a nation of immigrants. All of us are descended from immigrants. Do you think illegal immigration is a problem? And if you do, what would you as president do about it in the first 6 months of your administration?
Tough in the 30-second box. Yes, I do think illegal immigration is a problem, because it burdens both the illegal immigrants who come here and become a subculture of people without documentation, and it also hurts the country. What we need to do is to replace our system of illegal immigration, which is thought out, planned, and I tell people 15 million illegal immigrants did not sneak across the border without the government knowing it. We need to redesign a system that allows people who want to come here for limited times to work and go back to their countries to do so. We need to have a system that allows people who want to come here and pledge their future to this country and become Americans to come here, and it has to be accommodated within the labor demands that we have. You can't let 1 million people in to do 15 million jobs and expect your system is going to work.
Thank you. Carolyn Colleen.
Well, it's a touchy issue with me, because I have lived near the Mexican border. I have worked with the Mexicans picking cotton, etc. And without them, the more I observe them these last 50 years or so, without them, the average American wouldn't have any food on the table. So I'm saying there's got to be a way we can incorporate these poor souls that want to immigrate or are already here.
Mr. Skoke?
From what I've heard, that it's not that we are letting in illegal immigrants, it's that we are failing to keep track of the ones that are let in illegally, and then their visa expires, and we need to keep better track of them.
Thank you. Mr. Caligari.
The illegal immigration problem seems to be a Mexican or Latin American immigration problem. Their economies suck. We're, big time, so they're coming up here and doing whatever labor they can. I'm against that, but again, one thing I'm really advocating is citizens deciding issues. I believe in legal immigration, and the citizens should figure out a number to come out. I don't know who talked us in to give us your tired, your poor, your wretched excess. I say give us your rich, your smart, and your good-looking, tall, blonde women.
Thank you, and that concludes the first segment of the lesser-known candidate debate. Bear with us for a moment while we change up the microphones. We will start with Senator Jack Barnes, and we'll go through your 2-minute opening statements. Senator Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman Cheney, and the members of the New Hampshire Political Library for putting this event on. I think it's fantastic, and those listening can understand why New Hampshire is first in the nation primary, why it's still here and why it always will be, to have an event like this and to have people like these folks up here with me being able to go ahead. I was going to run for President of the United States. However, when American hero John McCain came forward and decided to run, I decided that wouldn't be a good move because I'm not an American hero. I'm just a state senator from New Hampshire. I've been in the New Hampshire legislature going on my 18th year. John McCain, I figured, would be much better suited to be the President of the United States than myself. So I ran for the Vice Presidency of the United States, and I am running for it, because I have two things on my mind that have bothered me for a long time, and I don't hear too many people talking about it. Number one is the United Nations. I thought the United Nations was founded in 1947 to be the world's peacekeepers. In 1950, I fought in Korea under the UN banner. There were 28 countries helping our country fight that war against communism. I look in Iraq, and all I see is resolutions coming out of the United Nations. I think the United Nations is a useless organization when it comes to keeping the peace. I don't think America should be the world peacekeepers. Get our guys home, get the rest of the countries involved, and help us fight what we're fighting over there, terrorism. Let's do that. Second thing I have a problem with is this country is a great country. It's the greatest country in the world. It always will be. But we have situations here in this country where we don't have enough money. We don't have enough money to build schools, to build roads. We had a bridge collapse out in Minneapolis. People got killed. We have highway problems. We have kids going to school hungry. This is America, not a third world country. I propose, if I get elected vice president, to talk to my president and say, Mr. President, let's have a $100 billion aid program for America. Not foreign aid, but domestic aid. Each state gets $2 billion set up and applied for by the governor and the legislature of the various 50 states. Let's get $2 billion out there to each state so we can rebuild our schools, rebuild our roads, and make sure we don't have kids in our state going hungry. I think it's horrendous. And I have a third item. If anyone out there decides that they want to send money to my campaign, I promise not to spend any of it on political ads, signs, or any of the other deal. What I'd like them to do, if they want to send me money, it'll go to the food banks here in the state of New Hampshire so we can fill the shelves up that are going bare during the holiday season. So anybody out there that wants to donate to my campaign, they're donating to the people here in New Hampshire who need the food. And with that, I say thank you very much for allowing me to speak my piece.
Thank you, Senator Barnes. Hugh Court.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Hugh Court, Republican candidate for president. I'm a counterterrorism expert. I've written a book on 9/11. I'm in touch with intelligence experts around the world. And we have alarming news that Osama bin Laden is planning new and devastating attacks in America. His American Hiroshima plan, where he intends to blow up 10 American cities with nuclear devices. When I first heard about this, I thought it was science fiction, but then I talked to Hamid Mir, who's the top Pakistani journalist in Pakistan. He's one that interviews Condoleezza Rice and Tony Blair. And Hamid Mir has interviewed Osama bin Laden 3 times, and is the only man that interviewed Osama after 9/11. I spent a weekend with Hamid Mir, and he tells us that Osama acquired 20 suitcase nuclear bombs from the former Soviet Union, and he's already smuggled these nuclear devices through the Mexican border, and they are here. I talked to Joseph Bodansky, who is the director of Congress's Task Force on Terrorism for 10 years. Joseph Bodansky told me that Osama bin Laden did acquire 20 suitcase nukes from the former Soviet Union, and he also hired 20 Russian Spetsnaz soldiers to maintain and service those nukes, and Joseph Bodansky made a report of that to a congressional committee. We're very alarmed because we feel that the FBI is falling down on this, just like they did on 9/11. They're refusing to search the mosques in Washington, D.C. and New York, where we think Osama may have these bombs. I talked to my friend Fred Barnes of Fox News, and he said, Hugh, you're right, the FBI is too politically correct to search those mosques. He said, give me your info and I'll take you to Dick Cheney, which he did 4 months ago. And we're trying to stop this. If you want to find out more about this, please go check out our website, courtforpresident.com. That's court, C-O-R-T, 4FOR, president.com, courtforpresident.com, and click on the counterterrorism site. Also, we feel that Michael Chertoff is not warning people enough. It's very simple to avoid radiation. If, God forbid, one of these things goes off, you stay in your home for 3 days, and radiation subsides to a 100th of its previous level, then it's safe to go out for 10-minute trips. And after 2 weeks, you can go out all the time. Anyone that leaves out the house sooner will get a fatal dose of radiation. Now, I'm also friends with General Tom McInerney of Fox News. General McInerney says we'll never win the war in Iraq till we deal with Iran, because Iran does massive interference with all these IEDs and weapons and stuff. Plus, General McInerney says Iran will have nuclear weapons in a year or less. This national intelligence estimate is a bunch of baloney. Iran itself admits that they have 3,000 centrifuges, and we all know that that's enough to create enough enriched uranium to make one nuclear bomb per year. So they will have one nuclear bomb in a year for sure. They have 24 nuclear sites, many of which are hidden deep underground. They've probably been spinning centrifuges for a long time. They worked on this program secretly. General McInerney says we need to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, and we can take out all 24 nuclear sites in a 48-hour bombing campaign. Yes, it's drastic, but don't you wish we'd listen to Winston Churchill when he was begging us before World War II to stop Hitler before he got big? Instead, we waited until Hitler got big, and it took 62 million people to die to stop him. If we wait till Ahmadinejad and the mullahs get big, it will take 200 million people to stop them. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So also, we want to control illegal immigration. We also want to stop abortion and homosexual marriage, get America back to God. If you will Google silent scream, you'll see where the fetus swims to the corner of the womb and gets, when its arms and legs are pulled off, it lets out a big giant scream, where they call it the silent scream because it's in the womb. And that's why the abortionists have done 10,000 abortions, stopped doing abortion. We saw that. He said, my God, they do feel the pain. So please vote for me, Dr. Hugh Court, for president to stop Osama's coming attacks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Court. Cap Fendig.
Mr. Cheney, Secretary Gardner, panelists in New Hampshire, and all those looking in. My name is Cap Fendig. I'm from St. Simons Island, Georgia, and I'm here to offer myself and my services to the American people if they so desire. Our founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, 56 of them, where they pledged their lives, their fortunes, their families for the hope of a better nation. I am doing the same in the sense that I have sold my business, my real estate holdings, all the security that I have to stand up for our nation. It's the duty of every citizen to stand up in the need of their nation, and I commend all the men that are up here with those efforts. The future of our nation is at risk because the fiscal policy coming out of Washington, the promised entitlements, the interest on our deficit, is going to take away our choices for the future. It's going to take away the choices for my children, my grandchildren, and that's why I'm here today. There are many issues that are on the forefront, but if we don't have the money to provide security, to take care of domestic policy, we will not be able to choose our destiny as a nation. And our Congress, both Republican and Democrat, have unfortunately given us a bill that we can't pay, and these are not my words, these are the words of our Comptroller General, Mr. David Walker, who has gone around this country after pleading on deaf ears of Congress to plead with American citizens that we have an economic and fiscal policy that's unsustainable. Our future is at risk, and I'm here. I'm an elected official from Georgia. I'm in my 8th year of serving. I understand how government works. I had a tour business. I understand the heart of America. I had people come from all over our nation to visit our area. It was the home of the G8. So unlike most campaigns that have gone to try to find out what Americans feel, I understand how mainstream America feels, and I'm here to amplify their concerns over the fiscal, moral, spiritual, and political decline of our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fendig. Daniel Gilbert.
Well, I'm Daniel Gilbert, and it's great to be back to New Hampshire. I've been up here about 21 days since last May, and I certainly enjoy meeting all the people. Politicians are the problem. They are not the solution. What is happening to our country is that Congress is out of control. Yes, we will elect a president in 2008, but if we have a Nancy Pelosi House and a Harry Reid Senate, we will not be able to get anything accomplished that leads this country down a better road. We have so many critical issues that this country needs to face, and we have people up in Congress right now wondering about whether or not to impeach Dick Cheney or whether or not we need to worry about tapes that were destroyed. Those issues are not important. We have gas prices that are the worry of the people in the North Country of New Hampshire. They're worried that people won't come up there because the gas prices are high and they won't make a living. And the only way they make a living is during the winter with the winter sports. I've talked to these people. They are concerned. They're worried. Their concern also is Congress. We know that the approval rating of Congress is 11%, and it's gone down over the past several years because of the out-of-control Congress, out-of-control spending, out-of-control bureaucracy that we have in the government. What am I trying to do in my candidacy? What I'm trying to do is to start and lead a program called We the People Movement within the Republican Party. What I'm doing is setting an example, and motivating and inspiring other businessmen and women like myself who are willing to step forward, who are not politicians, but willing to step forward and run against these entrenched politicians in Congress. If we don't replace the politicians and get people up there who believe in the Constitution, believe in their country, believe in what we're going to leave their children and grandchildren, that's what we need in Congress. We don't need people up there who are more concerned about the party, more concerned about the lobbyists, more concerned about the special interests. We have to stop Congress, and We the People movement is the way I'm going to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Albert Howard.
Thank you. I am here in the state of New Hampshire to appeal to the state that features the first primary of our nation. I believe that as we stand here this evening with another opportunity to be heard, it is our duty to recognize our position and to recognize that we are creatures and we have a creator. America has a spiritual problem this evening. Their problem is that they're embarrassed of their God. Our God is a very jealous God, and our founding fathers were very aware and very spiritually sensitive, and they knew whom their creator was, and they knew whom they had to give the glory to. America has lost the glory because we have ignored the person of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We must recognize, we must worship the Creator. We must realize that we must put things in order. Everything must be done in decency and in order. And we must give back what has been given to us, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This evening, I believe that there is a very sensitive spot in God's heart for the state of New Hampshire, because New Hampshire has been given the opportunity to set the agenda, to set the pace for the rest of the nation. New Hampshire has a responsibility this evening. The state of New Hampshire has an obligation to get back to the basics, not just to study the candidates that are being featured right now, but to study the history of America, study the reason why we stand different and why we are having people come from all over the world. They don't come to this nation because they're different people. They come to this nation because there's something very special about America. And it begins here with you, the state of New Hampshire. You must decide by not looking at the person's flesh and blood. You must decide, you must ask God for guidance to discern the hearts of the candidates that are running in this office. We must remember that the Bible says that if my people who are called by my name shall humble myself and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. James Creighton Mitchell.
Thank you, President Cheney, Secretary Gardner, and New Hampshire Political Library for convening the lesser-known candidate forum promoting democracy for all Americans. I am proud to be an American. I'm an honorably discharged U.S. Navy veteran. Preserving, protecting, and defending the Constitution from all threats, foreign and domestic, are an important part of who I am and what I bring to this presidential campaign. I am the common man in this presidential campaign with a mission to eliminate corruption as a political and business practice in America, enforce our laws, restore civility in political discourse, empower the disenfranchised to be able to enjoy prosperity and their rights as Americans, and reclaim the world's respect for America as the democratic leader for world peace and the example of inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all mankind. The Ten Commandments of antiquity acknowledged the belief in God and provided a straightforward statement of peaceful coexistence by defining relationships and expecting integrity in human interaction to sustain harmony. We have lost sight of the importance of integrity in human interactions. The American experience took a course of its own, beginning with the Declaration of Independence, which acknowledged the belief in God and a reliance on the protection of divine providence, and followed a few years later with an important milestone in human interaction, our Constitution. This unique document also defines relationships, but it is between elected leaders and we the electors. It specifically enumerates the duties of the elected leaders. We have only two tasks, militia and pay taxes, and one responsibility, follow the laws enacted. What we do have, which is particularly unique in human interaction, is a Bill of Rights, protections from leadership abuses of power or the reduction in our freedoms, and the right to peacefully change that leadership if we choose to vote. The importance of our voting is continued ratification of the Constitution of America and a demonstration to every other nation and the peoples that peaceful transition of leadership is possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Cornelius Edward O'Connor.
Hi, how are you tonight? I think my main message is that America is collapsing, but no one will talk about it. The media won't talk about it, and the so-called major candidates won't talk about it. When I say collapsing, obviously the dollar is the symptom of the collapse. The causes are a trade deficit, which has set all-time planetary records the last 5 years. 2006 getting up to $764 billion. We must obviously export that same amount of money to the world to pay for our trade deficit. We have a budget deficit which is so overwhelming, mainly because Bush has, of course, cut the taxes on the wealthy so much that Warren Buffett, the nation's most famous investor, begs to be taxed more because he is paying less percentage-wise than many middle Americans, many middle-income Americans. Therefore, we must borrow. And we have gone, when George Bush first came into office, the national debt was $5.7 trillion. Today it is $9.1 trillion, a 58% increase in only 7 years. It is literally criminal. And of course, our dollar has fallen roughly 40% against the euro, 35-36% against Canadian dollar, and there is no sight of end as we continue to cut our rates and China raises them. That will continue. Let me talk about some other things. We are in, as my friend here said, the problem is politicians. And politicians are, we are in a great war with China right now to decide whether we or China will become the world superpower of the future. China is constantly upgrading its nuclear. This is not merely an economic thing, it's also a military thing. But instead of fighting this war, our corporations and our government are actively helping China win. They are industrializing and enriching China. They are closing our American factories, throwing American workers out into the street, and destroying the industrial base that saved us in World War II. Even more incredibly, our corporations are putting most of our replacement factories inside the walls of China and therefore under the control of a communist dictatorship. We have a trade deficit with China alone that's approaching $1 billion a day, which means we're giving China $1 billion of our wealth every day. Pure insanity. We are also engaged in a not-so-subtle war with Mexico, which has convinced all Mexicans through their media constantly that our entire Southwest, once a part of Mexico, still belongs to Mexico today. Therefore, Mexicans are convinced that they have a right to come across our border and stay here. Whether what is happening now is a vast Mexican invasion or merely an enormous mass migration, carefully orchestrated and supported by the Mexican government, you can debate that. What cannot be debated is that we will become a Spanish-speaking majority within 35 years and a Spanish-speaking voting majority 10 years later. But instead of fighting this invasion of migration, our government does nothing to stop it. After all, American corporations want the cheap Mexican and Guatemalan labor to lower their labor costs, and again, our politicians are in the corporate pocket.
Mr.
Most
O'Connor.
dangerous of all is the greatest act of appeasement in the history of this planet, a combination of Bill Clinton and Bush II. In '98, India and Pakistan exploded nuclear weapons. Clinton did absolutely nothing of substance whatsoever.
Mr. O'Connor.
Finish it up, fine. The problem is politicians. We need to take power back from politicians. We are a corporatocracy and not a democracy anymore. But not one of the real, so-called real politics. And they're real because they get those campaign contributions. And the media respect them because they're getting all the money. And the more money they're getting, the more the media respect them. But there's a quid pro quo for that money. Anyway, thank you very much.
We'll move to the round of questioning and begin with Sean O'Kane with a question for Senator Jack Barnes.
Thank you, and welcome to all of you as well to New Hampshire. And a perfect segue for my first question, Senator Barnes, and a state senator from our state. The primary schedule this cycle is more front-end loaded than ever before, to the point where we're very likely going to know who the party nominees are by sometime in February. Do you think this is advantageous to the American voter and how we decide our nominees, or do you think it does a disservice to the process?
Well, I'll tell you, Sean, thanks for the question. I think New Hampshire, with the first in the nation primary, I think this is the important state. As I heard a while ago, New Hampshire grows presidents. And I think, the rest of this coming together, fine, it's going to happen. But New Hampshire being first in the nation, that I think is of utmost importance to the candidates. And this is where it all starts. And this is where they start to the White House, right here in New Hampshire. And I hope it stays here.
Mr. Court?
Thrilled about New Hampshire. It's just a great place to campaign, and I've been very fortunate to get to meet Harry Gale of Sullivan County, the county chair, showed me all around Sullivan County, and Phyllis Woods, your old National Republican Committee woman, had a wonderful luncheon for us up there in her county, and I just got back from last night, Colonel Frank Tilton up there in Belknap County, and the people of New Hampshire are just really great. They're really interested in politics. They're very concerned. I want to see New Hampshire continue to be the first in the nation.
Thank you. Mr. Fending.
I think the process of front-loading the primaries definitely takes away the opportunity for candidates to be sharpened by the American people, and it takes away the opportunity for the American people to fully debate their candidates.
Mr. Gilbert?
I would say that it's probably better to have the front end loaded because it gives an opportunity for people who don't have as much money. I'm not talking about us guys because we're not in the media forefront right now. But the people who have, the presidential candidates who have the least money are able to be in the news up there and not have the Mitt Romneys of this world to overspend and outspend everybody else. So I think it's a better way to go because they can get their message out better without being overwhelmed by political donations.
Mr. Howard.
Would you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I'm curious as to your feeling with the front-end loading that we're seeing in this primary cycle. Is it advantageous to the American voters, or does it do a disservice in the process of electing presidents?
Well, we certainly know the power of in the medium of the news, and I would personally like there to be more time for the political process to take its full fruition. Certainly, I would like to have more opportunity to speak to the people of New Hampshire. And this is certainly a great opportunity. There's not possibly any way that you can hear everyone's heart in this amount of time, and we need more time and we need more opportunities for this to engage.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell?
The United States of America is being steamrolled by this financial juggernaut of the Presidential Commission on Elections and big money. I am internally grateful and will be internally grateful for the rest of my life that New Hampshire has the courage to do what you're doing. And I would respectfully request every other state in the Union to have a forum and an opportunity for candidates like us to be able to participate. Because it means we don't have to have a bucket of gold to come before the public and come before the American people. And I think that's wrong, that when the political parties can manipulate the process so much by money and intimidation, it's wrong for Americans, and it is trashing our Constitution, in my opinion, and it is trashing this election process.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor.
I think the front loading is totally insane because if someone wins Iowa and New Hampshire, it's all over. The momentum is so monumental that I don't know how you're going to be able to stop them. A much more equitable system would be to have 3 states per week in alphabetical order for 16 weeks, whatever, then reverse the order the next 4 years to stage out the whole primary process over a period of 16 weeks, or more or less, if you understand what I mean. So, in other words, I think it's crazy. It's all going to be decided perhaps by New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Marie McKay, and Mr. Hugh Court will begin.
Thank you. As president, what would your approach be to federal spending, and how would you ensure fiscal
very good question, Marie. How do we stop this federal deficit spending that's going on? You know, I'm a Republican. I'm a lifelong Republican member of the President's Club of the RNC, but I am totally ashamed of the way the Republicans in Congress, when they were in control 2 years ago, were doing all that huge spending. They spent worse than drunken sailors, except drunken sailors spend their own money. Now, I personally will veto every single spending bill, and I'm ashamed that President Bush didn't veto any spending bills the first 6 years he's in office. I will veto every single spending bill until Congress realizes that pork is dead, and the only thing we're going to spend money on is to build up our military to where it was before Bill Clinton cut it in half.
Thank you. Mr. Fendig.
Well, cut to the quick. The first thing I'd do is introduce the fair tax for Congress to debate and hopefully pass. It's very clear we have a shrinking working population that is taxed and an expanding retirement and entitled population. With our commitments that we are obligated now on the interest on the deficit, those items together will assure that we will see a financial crisis in this nation. I think any candidate that stands up and promises a tax credit in this election or a national health plan is not being forthright with the American people. They are speaking about monies they do not have and cannot deliver. We need to be told and straight as the American people, in the next 10 to 20 years, you will see your taxes raised, you will see your benefits cut, and if we don't bring deficit payback plan for it, we will be insolvent. I live by an island called Jekyll Island. It's where the Federal Reserve was founded. Our country was bankrupt once before, and J.P. Morgan and others bailed this country out. It is going to happen again. And again, these are not my words. I'm repeating the Comptroller General's report and many other financial reports. The fair tax broadens the ability to meet our obligations. You have money offshore, corporate money, that's being taxed at 6% instead of 35%. That's $12 trillion. You have 10 to 22 illegal million immigrants in here. They would become part of the tax. Your criminal system would become the tax. Your visitors that come to this country, legitimate visitors, 40 million of those would begin to pay in the federal deposits. So we can't sustain what we have. We have to have complete overhaul, and it's ridiculous that nobody in our Congress over the last 8 years is willing up and be forthright with the American people and make the change.
Thank you, Mr. Fendig. Daniel Gilbert.
It gets back to how I started off, that politicians are the problem, and they're the problem here. Another group that I blame for the problem we're in financially right now is the Supreme Court. And you say, why the Supreme Court? Because right now, when a law is enacted, whether it's constitutional or not, and it's signed by the president, it goes into force. So any entitlement program can go right through. There's no review by the Supreme Court. What I would call for is that the Supreme Court timely review the constitutionality of every law that's passed. Right now, if a law is determined to be non-constitutional, it's years later because it takes years for any lawsuit to work back its way back up to the Supreme Court. So I would call on that. Of course, we need physical restraint. We need to eliminate pork barrel projects. We need to institute the line item veto. Just a bunch of other things that need to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Mr. Howard.
In the first 100 days of the Howard administration, I would absolutely eliminate the IRS, and I would have absolutely no sales tax and no income tax, and I would replace it with nothing. My colleague that mentioned Jekyll Island, Georgia, he mentioned the Federal Reserve. One of the biggest problems with the Federal Reserve is that there's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. It was started on 55 Water Street in New York City by a corporation of people that remain private and do not expect the American people and do not expect my administration to line up with anything having to do with the Federal Reserve, the IRS, or the United Nations. And in closing, I would say that the government needs to become accountable, stop printing money like Doritos, and you need to start fessing up to fiat money, because this is crazy. How can you raise a generation of children based upon money that has no basis at all? The United States government needs to grow up.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. Mitchell.
During my speech, if I were elected, the first thing I would talk about is reducing the national budget by 1% the first year, propose 2% the next year, 4% the next year after that, 6%, and say that we ought to have a plan to reduce and eliminate the national debt within 15 years. The second thing is, during this election process, I would encourage that there ought to be a national referendum for fairtax.org, and I would respectfully suggest every American go to that website and understand it, because we need to turn back what the IRS is doing as an intrusion to us, and this whole concept of taxation, pay to play at Congress level. So if you talk about politicians, it's people who have money come in and try and influence legislation. We see then that we have things like NAFTA, CAFTA, and GATT that are not benefiting labor in the United States, and it's causing corporations to ship overseas and taking our jobs out of middle America, Northeast America, everywhere in the United States. And when we lose jobs in America, we undercut the middle class. We break the backbone of the United States of America. That's wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. O'Connor.
Could you just repeat the question again, please?
Sure. As president, what would your approach be to federal spending, and how would you ensure fiscal discipline?
Well, first of all, cut out all entitlements. The pork is obscene. Second of all, we need to raise the tax on wealthy Americans right through the ceiling. Even before George W. Bush, we had the greatest gap between rich and poor of any developed nation. We need to, after World War II, we had income tax rates that got up to 90% for the wealthy. I'm not suggesting that. A little 70 or 80% would be nice for people who have had a free ride during the Bush years. So maximize the taxes, get the money from the rich, end all loopholes for the rich. Go through the entire tax code and get those loopholes out by which they avoid spending taxes, paying taxes.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Senator Barnes.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. I would go to my president and advise him that we should bring members of Congress, who are the ones that are basically responsible for the spending that we have going on, bring them in groups, sit them down, explain to them what's going on and that we cannot spend money that we don't have. Try to get through to them that we need their help. The president needs their help to control the spending in this country. And number two, I'd suggest to the president that he goes to the American people in the next election cycle for Congress, which will be 2 years out, and let the American people know, please send me people in Congress that will control the spending in this country.
Thank you, Senator Barnes. And as we go to the next round, I'd like to thank you for being pretty close to that 30-second time limit, but let's try to stick to that so that we move quickly through from question to question. The next question does come from Terry Shoemaker.
Candidates, thank you. I noticed that you're all from different states, some states quite far away. Thank you for filing in our primary and participating in American democracy. I'd like to talk about one of the foundations of American democracy, and that is public education. President Reagan proposed that the Federal Department of Education be abolished. More recently, President Bush and a Democratic Congress have imposed the biggest federal mandate on the states in history, called No Child Left Behind. I would like each of you to tell us, do where you think the control of public education should be. Should the federal government be controlling public education, or should we return to more local control of public education?
We start this round with Mr. Fendig.
Well, I think every American citizen knows that the more you put in the hands of federal government, the more inefficient and ineffective it's going to be. Education system needs a complete overhaul at the high school level. When you have graduation rates across the nation barely achieving 50 or 60%, yet in private schools or charter schools, which are public corporations of partnership in a local community that have graduations of 90 to 100%, our education system is outdated and irrelevant. The Federal Department of Education does need to be abolished. The money and the policy needs to be put in the hands of the locals who can take care of their students and provide free choice to all parents. You wouldn't have a proliferation of homeschools and private schools if the public education system was doing its job. With an overhaul, with a charter school format, and a national proven record of success, we can turn the education around for this country and provide the true opportunity and guidance that our kids need.
Thank you, Mr. Fendig. Mr. Gilbert?
I have a sister that's a school teacher, and she says the No Child Left Behind does not work, because what you're doing is promoting somebody who's not ready to go into the next grade. They might have passed the test, but they are not ready to go into the next grade. We need to eliminate most of the programs that the federal government has regarding the state schools. The state Board of Education needs to control the education in the state, but primarily the control should be at the local level, because they know what the students' needs are and what the student requirements are. Of course, there should be standardized tests for sure, because of college admissions, but primarily it should be local level.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Mr. Howard?
As a father of 8 children, I believe I have a heartful response to this question. I would, first of all, my administration would eliminate the Department of Education. We homeschool our children, my wife and I, and we thoroughly believe that responsibility starts at the home, starts with the father, and it starts with the mother. We need to dissect and find out why the family has been split in our nation, why the father and the mother are not included in the family home, particularly the African American family, and why there's so many African American men in prison. I believe that's a family problem, and can be traced right back to the family. So that is my answer to that.
I agree. We ought to eliminate the Federal Department of Education. I'm a believer that education is a local issue, but it's only a local issue if you get more than 20% of the people that turn out to vote. That's basically what the turnout is in Illinois. You might have 2 people running for 2 seats. The media doesn't cover it. You might have, let me rephrase that. You need to have parents take an active role in what's happening in their school. It begins with the election process. It happens to get good school board members who take an active interest in what's going on. It means that they hire effective administrators to do the job that they're supposed to do. And it falls down at the ballot box when we don't go out and vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. O'Connor?
Like we're unanimous here, I would also eliminate the Department of Education. Each state has its own values, its own ways of doing things, plus you have one way to start in cutting the budget to just run a line through that. But so definitely eliminate it. Give power to local. The difference between Utah and Massachusetts, between Arizona and Illinois, they're immense. People think differently. People deserve an education system that is appropriate to them.
Thank you. Senator Barnes?
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to start off by saying I'm sorry I wasn't up here when you asked a question about what president of the United States was the guy that I was looking at. My favorite, and it has been for a long time, is the 14th President of the United States. His name is Franklin Pierce. The reason he's my favorite president, he's the only one we've had from the great state of New Hampshire. Now, getting back to your question. Yes, it's local control. There's no question about it. Local controls at the school boards throughout the country. It's the people. You heard about a 20% turnout in Illinois. Thank God we have people here in New Hampshire that pay more attention to it than apparently the people in Illinois. more people come out. It's in the citizens' hands. That's where it should be. Would I abolish the department? I'd have to look at that. I think there's probably a need for some help. I'm not going to say direction. I'm going to say some help, a place we can go to from the communities to get some help.
Ambassador, I think there's a lot of problems with the Department of Education. They're intruding into our values. They're teaching homosexual lifestyles okay. They're giving condoms to our kids. In some of these schools, I think that big changes need to be made. It needs to be on the local level. We need to abolish the Department of Education and make it up to the states and the local. Also, we need to provide a tax break for people that send their child to a private school or do homeschooling. Why should they have to pay a full amount of taxes to support the other people that are getting the public education? They should pay for something for public education, but not the full extent. I think they should get a tax break if they homeschool their child or have their child in a private school. Also, we need to focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic. There are a lot of these high schoolers that are graduating, and even people in college that can't read or write. That needs to stop. They need to get a test at the end of the year to see if they can do reading and writing and arithmetic, the 3 R's, and only move on at that case. And I do believe that we should change No Child Left Behind and leave it up to the states. And it's a very good question.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Next question comes from Sean O'Kane, and Mr. Gilbert will be the first.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert, let's turn to the environment for a moment. The United States is currently involved in climate talks in Bali with the EU nations, 16 nations, I believe. There's a growing impasse with the United States supporting voluntary cutbacks in greenhouse emissions, while the majority of the EU nations want to see binding targets. Under your administration, what would be your view and your approach to dealing with greenhouse emissions?
We need to reduce greenhouse emissions, but not at the cost of jobs and our economy. I see no overwhelming evidence that the earth is warming. I see no overwhelming evidence that man is causing it. And I don't see any evidence that man can do anything about it if it is happening. I think it's a cyclic thing that yes, we should conserve. We should reduce our carbon footprint because that's just a good thing to do. The Lord put us here to be a steward of our planet, not to abuse it.
Thank you.
Mr. Howard?
In regards to the environmental issues and the greenhouse effect, I believe that, again, that can go to the local level. I believe that the European Union has nothing to do with the United States country and the way that we deal with our environment. That's on our soil, that's our business. I believe that we can work on, as the country of Sweden is working on windmills, and I believe in dealing with person is polluting my river behind my house. I believe that there should be local accountability, and we should have a contract, and we should work that out on a local level, on the state level.
Mr. Mitchell?
I believe we ought to have more investment in nuclear power. I think the technology is there to do 100% recapture of gases from different coal-fired facilities. That might mean new facilities. Quite simply, let's start planting more trees. Let's reclaim some of the desert. Let's start over in the Sahara Desert. It seems kind of strange, but you know, if we're chopping down a bunch of trees to grow food to bring to America for Central and South America, let's start replanting trees. There's a lot of land in the United States that's available for agribusiness for forest products. It's a simple solution, and it's something we could do right away.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. O'Connor?
I would sign it today, definitely. It is a tragedy that China is never included in in Kyoto or anything else, but I think I'd probably still sign any kind of a greenhouse gas reduction, emissions reduction. There are so many things we can do: bike lanes, electric cars. There are a million things we can do, more solar power. But I've seen satellite photos of the pollution coming over from China's coal-powered electric plants. And you can see that pollution come right over into Washington and Oregon. So I really think that China should be included. But even if it were not, I would still sign it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we certainly have to come up with alternative solutions to the energy situation in this country. I don't like being held hostage by that nutcake in Venezuela, the Middle East, the The Russians, I don't like our money going there to buy their oil. I'm lucky enough, I sit on the Senate Environmental Committee. That's one of the committees I serve on. And the good news is in the state of New Hampshire, there are a couple of pieces of legislation that are going to be looking very clearly and closely at what's going on with the situation. The state takes it seriously, and it will be discussed at great length the next session.
Sean, I believe that we should reduce pollution. I think we should go to nuclear power. The French, gets 80% of their electricity from nuclear power. I think we only get 20%. I think we need to move that way. I think we need to go to hydrogen cars. That's a great technology we need to pursue. But I do want to say one thing about global warming. Yes, there has been global warming. The Earth is 1 temperature degree hotter than it was 100 years ago, but that's not due to greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide or human activity. That is simply the Earth, the sun going through one of its more intense phases. The French researchers found that the sun is 30% more intense light than it was 100 years ago. Roman soldiers wrote in their diaries that you could grow grapes year-round in England back in 100 AD now, and also then the Earth went through a cooling period, and then it went through a warming period. In the Middle Ages, you could grow grapes year-round in England, and then they went through a cooling period, and now you can grow grapes 2 months out of the year, but you can't grow grapes 10 of the other months, so we're warming up, but not as warm as it was in the Roman days or as in the days in the Middle Ages. Also, too, Mars has polar ice caps just like we do, and their ice caps have been shrinking just like ours have been shrinking. And guess what? There are no cars on Mars.
Thank you, Mr. Court.
How do you know
Mr.
that?
Fendig.
You've been there.
Well, two things. Let's talk about pacts, global pacts, the Kyoto Protocol. These discussions, the reason they're in impasse because they undermine the American sovereignty. They really don't deal globally with accountability, and they're unenforceable. So no, I wouldn't sign those type of contracts. But America is the leader of the free world, and you lead by example. As a president, I would end the import of all foreign oil within 10 to 15 years and reinforce the American industry race to supply the energy needs that we need within. We don't need to be servant to outside of our country. And in doing so, we make a Kyoto Pact with our corporate businesses inside of America and set a standard that the rest of the world would be glad and willing to follow.
Thank you, Mr. Fendig. Our next question is from Marie McKay, and it is directed first at Albert Howard.
As president, you will nominate people to serve as judges on the federal bench. What sort of qualities would you be looking for?
Qualities that I would be looking for would not be on the assumption that the Supreme Court would need to do anything. Again, I would go back to the local level. I believe, for an example, Roe versus Wade, we wouldn't even have that situation right now if it was dealt with on the local state level. I believe that the involvement of the Supreme Court in our issues that should be dealt with on a local and state level have been unconstitutional. So I would put the focus again on the government for the people, by the people, and of the people. And the Supreme Court would need to be only relevant in a situation where they are relevant. That's the only reason I would call upon them. That's the only reason the American people should call upon the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. Mitchell?
I think I'd take a look at someone who was a Boy Scout. Boy Scouts in America have been trashed by the ACLU and a bunch of other people who want to join the organization that do not believe in their value structure. So I want somebody who comes to me to be a judge. I want to know what their value structure is. I want to make sure that they're a family person. I want to make sure that their values, they have a respect for God, no matter what their religion is, and they have a belief in America and our Constitution.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor?
I would want a Supreme Court justice who despised campaign contributions as much as I did, and who saw them for what they are, corporate bribes. We have 5 justices who continue to vote to say that campaign contributions are free speech, when it is the antithesis of free speech. Free speech is supposed to protect the little guy from the all-powerful government. Campaign contributions strengthen the strong guy and the strong guy's opinion so that you can't even hear the little guy. One begins almost to suspect since the Supreme Court knows very well that campaign contributions are the greatest corrupter of both the executive and legislative branches, how can they possibly tolerate them unless they themselves are getting some money from corporations themselves? Everyone hates to say anything bad about the Supreme Court, but I would certainly think about one of the first things I would do just to see if I had a Congress that was with me, to see about impeaching 5 Supreme Court justices that love campaign contribution so very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Mr. Barnes.
I'm going to be very honest with you. I'd be looking for men and women who will follow the Constitution of the United States, but here comes my honesty out. I'd want them to have a conservative edge.
I would definitely want to have judges that would respect the Constitution. Part of that is to respect the civil rights of the unborn child. And I would like to criticize some of my candidates, the better-known candidates. For example, Mitt Romney and Fred Thompson say they're pro-life. They want to overturn Roe versus Wade. Well, very well, that turns it back over to the states. Then what are they going to do? They say they want to leave it up to the states. Well, great. So half the states are going to be aborting babies and half aren't. How does that solve the problem? How are they pro-life? Also, John McCain and Ron Paul both voted against the federal marriage amendment. They think gay marriage should be left up to the states. Now, how's that going to be to have half the states having gay marriage and half the states not having gay marriage? Is that having a nation that pleases God? I don't think so. And how about Rudy Giuliani that said he would pay for his own daughter to have an abortion? I will get justices on the Supreme Court that will uphold the Constitution and protect the life of the unborn child.
Thank you, Mr. Fending.
On the conservative side, right?
Well, George Washington said a very powerful statement. He said, "It is the principles of the Constitution that the will of the American people shall prevail." And that will changes from generation to generation. So the first thing that I would do as president is I would take away, offer to the American people the opportunity to take away lifetime appointments in the federal judicial system, except for the Supreme Court. I think then you have judges that are closer, more accountable to the people, and will support what our founding fathers implemented. We are Republicans up here. We are conservative. We are for life, for the principles that our nation was founded on, which are the good for the health of a nation. It's not just faith, although they were majority faith-based beliefs. Their principles, which have guided this to be the greatest nation, are principles that sustain a nation and keep it healthy from generation to generation. Whatever the reflective values may change, it'll still come out healthy with the right type of system.
Mr. Gilbert.
Back in the 1780s, when the Supreme Court first got together, they made a rule, which I touched on earlier, and that rule was we will not render a decision to politicians unless we have a case in front of us. And that is the rule that was self-imposed on themselves that has kept the Supreme Court for deciding the constitutionality of every law that's passed. I would look for a judge that would take a serious look at that rule. I would also want somebody who's a constructionist. I would want somebody who wants to protect the country and wants to do what's best for our children and grandchildren. I would also want somebody that has a belief in God. I don't want somebody sitting on the Supreme Court who doesn't believe in God and thinks they are.
Our next question is from Ambassador Terry Shoemaker, and it is directed first at Mr. Mitchell.
Candidates, recently, and I'm sure you've all heard about at least some of them, we've had a whole bunch of celebrity endorsements. So my question to you is, if you could only be endorsed by one celebrity, who would it be and why? Mr. Mitchell, I believe.
I would refuse it. I want the American people to endorse me. I want to stand on my own record, not on what somebody else who has got some kind of fame and glitz out there because whatever they do for their job, and I respect them for that. But I want the American people to endorse me.
Mr. O'Connor?
I would say somewhat facetiously, I think the question is maybe a little bit facetious, but all Britney Spears has to do is to drive her car down the street and she would wipe out, take World War III off the front page. So Britney Spears, definitely.
Once again, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for the question. You had a question earlier that I wasn't up here for. What direction is America going in? I look at this as being half full, but not half empty with America. To answer your question, I want my wife to endorse me. I've been married for 53 years. She knows me better than anybody else that's going to be voting for me. It's my wife who I would love to have endorse me. And she will not give out toasters at a gathering of candidates, just in case that comes up.
I would like to have Pastor John Hagee endorse me. He may not be a celebrity known to a lot of people, but if you've watched Trinity Broadcasting Network, he's very famous. John Hagee is a great man of God, and I would love to have his endorsement.
Well, the celebrities in my life, like the senator, is my wife, who's sitting over here tonight and has trooped around Iowa and all over the southeast United States and now New Hampshire with me, and my children and my grandchildren and my parents. That's where it starts. It starts at home first. It's an honor to come here to serve them and to offer that service to the nation.
I don't know many celebrities, and not many of them have the same views that I do on the political situation. I'm the same as the senator. I seek the endorsement of my wife. I have that. I have 2 kids. They endorse me. I have 6 grandkids, from 20 down to 2. All of them endorse me except one, the oldest. He went to John Edwards' birthday party in North Carolina. What can I say?
Mr. Howard?
Again, as a father of 8 children, we recently had Bill Cosby in the Detroit, Michigan area to speak at a church. And my children like Fat Albert. They love when I say, hey, 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 it's Fat Albert. So since Bill Cosby created Fat Albert and my first name is Albert, why not Bill Cosby?
I would like, in the interest of having every one of you be able to go first, we're going to add one more question for Mr. O'Connor to start with. And since Senator Barnes kind of picked up on the theme, Ambassador Shoemaker, would you ask your question about no longer living presidents again?
The question to the earlier panel, which you're going to get a chance to answer now, was I'd like you to think about the presidents we've had and talk about a no longer living president that you would most like to emulate if you became president of the United States.
I think as a Republican, everyone is always talking about Reagan. I'm more of an Eisenhower fan. Eisenhower believed in balanced budgets, balanced trade deficits, and wars that made sense. He was kind of firmly grounded in reality, and Eisenhower.
Senator Barnes, you have another crack, I guess.
Well, hey, there's no question the 14th President of the United States is the guy that I'm looking at. For those of you who don't know, the 14th President of the United States, before he became the President of the United States, he was the Speaker of our House in the same building that is still in use by our House of Representatives. I believe he was the youngest. I think Bill Gardner told me that one time. And that gentleman, I would love to follow in his footsteps, and I hope sometime New Hampshire has that second President of the United States down there.
Thank you. Mr. Court.
I like George Washington. George Washington hung in there for 8 years and he won the war. I want to challenge Ron Paul to a debate. He wants to cut and run and lose the war in Iraq. And if we lose the war in Iraq, and all those Iraqis that support us are going to be slaughtered, it's going to be worse than Rwanda, and we're going to, also Al-Qaeda and Iran are going to take over that country, and Iran is the #1 top sponsor of terror. 80% of the world's terror attacks were created by Iran. They're going to use that as a training ground. They're going to move into the Middle East. And they're going to destabilize that. They may even move into the Saudi oil fields, and a lot of Shiites live there, and we may have World War III on our hands. I challenge Ron Paul to a debate. We need to win the war in Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. Court. Mr. Fendig?
Well, I think if you listen to our top-tier candidates, they invoke the name of Reagan and Reagan principles quite often. But Reagan did as he should. He stood by what conservative Republican values are. My favorite president would have to be George Washington also. He was an unknown man who took upon the service of his country as a commander and then reluctantly as president. He was full of faith, and I am a 30-year U.S. Coast Guard master captain, and he set the course for this country that we're still sailing on, and I'm grateful to him for that.
Mr. Gilbert.
I would also say George Washington, and one of the major reasons is that he had the common sense to leave after 8 years instead of sticking around like the career politicians we have now. I don't think George Washington would agree with NAFTA. I don't think George Washington would not block the border. I don't think George Washington would not enforce the 1986 immigration laws. I think George Washington is the person we need to turn to and get back to the Constitution, get back to term limits like we should.
Mr. Howard.
Both men, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, were men of prayer. I'm attracted to the power of prayer. I believe that if Abraham Lincoln or George Washington were looking back right now, they would say that 9/11 was an inside job. I believe that they would look at the facts and that 15 of the 19 people that were involved were from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, and 9/11 has nothing to do with Iraq. And I believe that as a nation, Abraham Lincoln understood the power of prayer and fasting. I believe that you cannot solve spiritual problems with physical solutions. I believe we need to get back to prayer and fasting. We would see results probably within 58 days in this nation. It's a very quick, simple solution.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell.
I agree. President George Washington, for a couple reasons. First of all, he was a self-made man. He surveyed a lot of America. He was a distinguished veteran, several campaigns. And when he left office, he gave his farewell address, and I would commend everyone to read that. But more importantly, he did not vote himself a retirement package. He did not vote himself a health care package. And so I think the message that we need to take away from here tonight is we need to return back the clock to self-reliance, individual responsibility. And therefore, George Washington's got my vote.
Thank you, and thank you all very much for joining us this evening at the New Hampshire Political Library's lesser-known candidate debate. I'd like to thank our panel, Sean O'Kane, Marie McKay, and Terry Shoemaker. And I'd like to turn it over to Secretary of State Bill Gardner to close the evening.
We would like to extend to you a sincere thanks for your willingness to be with us and for sharing your thoughts and ideas and campaigning with us. Those of you at the podium and those of you who have already been up there. We have, as a state, have tried to keep the American dream alive that any person's son or daughter can someday grow up to be president. And we welcome all that are willing to come here. The rigors on a day like this, it's sort of blizzard conditions outside. Some of you have mentioned that you haven't seen snow before. We've had another candidate like that who came as, like some of you have, relatively unknown, and came from a southern state of Georgia, and ended up winning this primary in a way that was quite unexpected, and went on to become president. So that dream that anyone has a chance, we feel very strong about that, and we welcome all of you and those before you and those that will come later to be part of this process and put yourself through the test. So thank you, and have a safe, wherever you're heading this evening, way back.